So my name is George Reinhardt. I've been involved in the cleanup out on the mill site since 2004, really. I started a little bit in 2003. When the mill closed in 2002, I started getting involved a little bit in 2003. But a group of us came together because a group of local citizens that called themselves North Coast Action, who way back then were really focused on this cleanup issue. There were a number of us who were a little more actually excited by the opportunities of renewable energy, net zero building, net zero water development out there, all of the kind of development possibilities, some of which we'll be talking about now. Some of these are ideas that are very, very current with the planning for the Noyo Center for Marine Science. We came to understand through the leadership of North Coast Action and stuff that this was really, really going to be a tough nut to crack to clean up. And that we were going to get incredible resistance. And it's really amazing to look back over these years since 2004 when we started working on this. What an odyssey it's been. But it's also, we've had many victories along the way. And one of the things I was explaining out on the mill site is there's a lot of interesting ironies about this interaction of corporate malfeasance and community naivete and earnestness and hopefulness that in a lot of ways our community has taught GP, and we need to keep teaching them, and we need to be really strong with them. But there is reason to believe that they have used language they developed here and learned from us in other places. We've heard about mills closed in Connecticut, where they used exactly the same language that was coming out of our group, which was called nudge, which was trying to kind of nudge the process forward in the planning. And this was really an interesting phenomenon when we get contacted by other people going, where did they get this lingo? And we're looking at our literature coming back from the corporation. This is, this is a little bit like William Burroughs of the soft machine, though, because that corporate entity will swallow up your creativity and your good intentions and not necessarily deliver on what you really want in terms of a cleanup and a really visionary future for Noyo headlands. But you've heard me talk a lot in these 2 days. I'm going to sit down, and then each of these people will introduce themselves. And I have a couple of points I want to make. I think they probably have some, but this last piece is especially. But we've been trying to do this. It's been mostly main speakers. We'd really like to have a dialogue now and hear about your thoughts. But let's hear who the other people are here at the table with me. And thanks so much for sticking around.
I'd actually love, can we start on that, please? Because I wasn't here in the morning, and so it's helpful to get a little more context.
Okay. Well, I just came a few weeks ago. Great. All right, I'll just quickly reiterate. So I'm Karina Nielsen. I'm a marine ecologist and conservation biologist, and I'm also, by training, and then I'm the director of the Estuary and Ocean Science Center at San Francisco State University. Prior to that, I taught for a number of years at Sonoma State University and did a lot of work in the early planning days for the Noyo Center up here. I've done a lot of research up here. I've been involved in the Marine Life Protection Act, scientific guidance, and also in doing some of the baseline studies in this area.
So my name is Leslie Kashiwada, and I moved here in 1999 when my husband was hired at Fish and Wildlife as the abalone biologist. I have a PhD in biological oceanography. I taught at San Diego State and a community college down in Southern California called Miracosta College. Although my training is as a scientist, my career has been as an educator, and I mostly have been raising our daughter. So when this early process came along, I remember bringing her as a toddler. She's now 18.
Great. 17 years.
And she was not a child who would sit quietly, so I'd often leave the meetings because she was climbing and jumping around. And So I'm really happy to be able to be involved in the process, maybe a little further down the road. George invited me to be a member of the Fort Bragg Headlands Consortium because of my scientific background. I do work for Fish and Wildlife, but I work with, at first, NPA outreach, but now it's being broadened to Marine Region outreach. But I'm also one of those community agitators that would get up at meetings before the City Council and the Planning Commission and express my opinion. But I always try to have my facts in order so that I'm not just speaking my opinion, but I'm also bringing some information to bear that people may not have thought of. So I really like helping people frame their thinking by giving them information.
Hi, my name is Maggie, and I'm here because George was at the Noyo Center inviting Sheila, the executive director, to speak, and I heard him describing this kind of, I forget the exact words you used, but I figured out pretty quickly that he was describing Ignacio Chapella, who was my senior advisor when I was in school. And so I was like, oh, well, if Sheila doesn't want to come, can I come instead? So yeah, a lot of gratitude to you and whoever else helped bring him here, and that helped get me here. So I just recently joined the team over at the Noyo Center, working as the administrative assistant. So I'll do the best that I can to represent what I've learned about the Noyo Center, but it sounds like there's many experts here, founders, and our board member David. And then I'm also here, I think, because I'm a young person who grew up in Fort Bragg, born and raised, left, went to school, and came back. I've been in the farm and garden world for a little while, and now, stepping into the Noyo Center, learning marine ecology vocabulary, which is brand new, and feeling really inspired about this moment, kind of with the coastal trail opening and the mill site plans. And I think the last piece that I'll add is that I think an important component of all this, and Ignacio spoke to it a bit yesterday, and I'm not sure how this morning went, but just like figuring out how we can do this all in a way that's healthy for, yes, the communities and the ecology, but then also for ourselves as individuals. And I feel like I've seen many young people who get really psyched about activism and burn out really quickly. And so, I'd love to kind of talk about some of that too, as how we can maintain our own health and also how that is reflected in the health of the land that we care about. So, yeah.
I'm going to touch on a couple of topics that hopefully will stimulate conversation between all of us. Last night, Ignacio spoke about scale and boundaries. And I know John Gallo has worked a lot with this notion of biological boundaries and might have something he wants to share with us today about that. Scale has always been something that our group Nudge and many in this community have always thought about. Somehow, when the planning process starts, and there have been many iterations of this, at least 6 that I could identify for you, 6 different attempts at trying to come up with plans at different times through these 17 years that I've been involved in this. Some of them never came to fruition. They just kind of got started and then just completely collapsed when the property owner got disillusioned with the fact that they didn't like what was being proposed. Scale has always been something the city has never understood. They've always gone big. And we need to go small, actually. We need to think in a sense of something that might grow organically from the town we have. Because our city could be, our town, the town of Fort Bragg, could be in serious jeopardy if some of these harebrained, big, wacky ideas or big box stores or different things happen out there. So I'm still very passionate about this development question. But the thing I really want to say is through the years, I've gone from talking about net zero building to talking about the restoration economy because I've watched it grow in the years that I've been here. And it's really an exciting thing. I wrote a little piece on it over here if you want to see about it, and there's a lot on the NUG's website about it, but it's underneath the radar for a lot of people, but we have jobs in fish and wildlife in the Noyo Center now. Look, Maggie just got a job. You know, I mean, we have an economy growing here that cannot be seen as a quick replacement for 2,000 jobs lost at the mill site. That's not what it is. But it's very complementary with the idea of sustaining a beautiful natural environment, which brings people here to walk the coastal trail, to live a healthy life maybe, or to just, as I think John was talking about earlier, to decompress from the life in the Bay Area or in other places. And the people we had, the evacuees from Central California during the fires, I mean, this was very intense to live through that. And our memories are always short. That's one of the things I think I'm always trying to evoke memory in people, because memory is a thing we should cherish and not live back there all the time, but remember these things and these moments we move through. The restoration economy is real, folks. It's happening under the radar, but we should nurture it in every way we can. Another idea that came up when we were out on the coastal trail is we're asking that these toxic elements that are in the mill pond and down in pond 6 below the mill pond and still are, in my concern, apt to be found in different places out there. We're asking that these be hauled away and placed in some other community. That's completely irresponsible. It's utterly irresponsible. And that's what we have to do. Because right now, as Ian and Ignacio pointed out, we have a system that is designed by the corporations to serve the corporations. We need to get to the point where communities like ours, if we want to really claim that mantle of being a community about health and well-being, communities like ours get on board with trying to help Kettleman City, who has been in lawsuits with DTSC and other agencies about why are you leaving all this, why are you taking toxins from all over California and concentrating them 5 miles outside of our town. We're very concerned about the pollution implications, and there's lawsuits about that. This seems like pretty far afield from what we're talking about today, folks, but it is absolutely morally imperative that we pay attention to, if we're successful in getting our toxins taken somewhere else, where are they going and why aren't they being treated and destroyed, and are they just being dropped in somebody else's lap to be their problem? The final thing I'd like to bring up is we heard at the very first speaker this morning was Araceli telling us about the Latino Coalition and their interest in this. And I want to reach out to Araceli briefly to just give us a sense of how can we communicate and get that connection going with what will be the majority demographic of our community in the blink of an eye, I suspect. Perhaps not. We have so many people like myself who are retiring from the Bay Area and moving up here because it's beautiful and because we can. But we also have a growing brown community that really, I would love to hear Araceli say, keep inviting us, or whatever it takes, but I don't want to speak for her, and I wanted to hear that as we come around to the end of this day, because it was a very moving opening, and I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. I don't pretend to know the answers. We are in probably the same situation that every other group is in. We're trying to figure out how do we bring the Latino community to meetings. I don't know if you are aware, but most of our Latino families, the parents don't only have a job, they have 2 or possibly 3. So we have heard that, after working 2 jobs, 3 jobs with maybe young kids, they don't have the time or the energy to come and sit at a 3-hour meeting. It's just not feasible for them. there is no time. You're raising your families and you are super busy working. But an example of how we got the community together to respond to our plea for help was when, a couple of years ago, when they were talking at the hospital about closing OB. A lot of our Latino families are, the moms are raising kids and are having kids. So we were able to mobilize the community, and in a matter of a week, we got like 300 signatures. So I get the sense that, tell us what you need from us and we'll show up.
Right?
But don't ask us to come to 2 or 3 hour meetings at 6 p.m. when we're trying to maybe have dinner together. So I don't pretend to speak for everybody. I can only speak for myself, and being that I don't have kids, that gives me the flexibility to, attend this type of meetings. And I'm absolutely open to the conversation. I'm open to, come to meetings and relay the information back to the Latino Coalition at our meetings. But I just don't have the answer. How do we bring them? I think it's just give us a task and we'll show up and support, your causes.
Make a comment? Translation services for this would be really nice. We'll talk to you later.
Oh yeah, I'm super good at, just translating.
We'll talk about it.
All right.
Thank you, Araceli. It's open now. We can talk about topics and people can ask us questions. This should be a congenial free-for-all.
I have just one thing to ask Araceli. I think that it's also really important if there's something from the Latinx Coalition, if there are needs there, that they be heard or understood. So,
And like I said on my presentation, it's part of our mission to empower the community. So that's how, by somebody bringing up the need of the kids that are struggling in school and they don't have there's no tutoring at schools, especially not in maybe Spanish. So just we asked the community to bring their needs to us, and that's how we started the tutoring group, because a parent said, my child really needs help. And I will share that when we started the group, a child who had just arrived from Guatemala came to the group. And I started tutoring her because she needed a native speaker. And then one other tutor is like, oh, I want to help her, so do you mind if I steal her from you? And I said, not at all. And she is working with this young lady, and they meet outside of our tutoring hours. And because these other tutors, the potential, she is a super fast learner, this child, and it's just make us feel good that we are listening to the community. So, it's hard, but if you bring something to our attention, then if we can, then we will step up to the plate and help.
I have a question and a comment. So I know that the focus of this is on the former mill site, the Noyo headlands, and we've talked about how there is sort of an artificial boundary between the marine environment and the terrestrial environment, and that's very subject to dynamic process. I would also suggest that the boundary between the property that's currently controlled by GP and potentially other investors and the rest of the city of Fort Bragg and the harbor is also kind of an artificial boundary, in that any planning that's centered around how Fort Bragg is going to either grow into that property or interface with that property, we need to be looking at all of Fort Bragg. Because what we have said, oh gosh, it would be great to have a such and such located on the headlands. Would that be better located somewhere else? The other thing is that GP owns other properties that are off-site from there, including a bark dump. And where I work at the Resource Conservation District, we've tried to figure out, how we can be involved in a plan to clean up that bark dump. And it's in a beautiful place, but it's got all these invasive plants, lots of pampas grass, it's got tons of bark, which isn't particularly as lethal as, dioxins, but it does have leachate, and it is under a mandate by the regional or the State Water Resources Control Board to, be monitoring it to eventually clean it up, and there is a timeline attached to it. So it's not just the headlands, it is a big picture issue. Just as we're connected to the rest of the North Coast and the rest of the planet, we have to integrate our thought processes to include the city of Fort Bragg, what is missing, what is needed, what will make that community thrive. And all of our eggs can't be on the headlands basket.
I agree.
So I'd like to speak to that a little bit because, when you see the development plans, there's an area surrounded by wetlands. It's called the donut hole, which is covered currently in asphalt and concrete. And there are other areas like that. And it keeps getting presented as well, because of that asphalt and that concrete, it can only, it's only suitable for industrial. And the thing is that even if industrial goes there, you're going to have to dig up the concrete. So there's nothing that says that that area has to be industrial. And that's one of the questions we've been asking is, are there other areas either on the headland site, like behind Rossi's potentially, but also north of town, that might be suitable? What about some of these residential areas that are being proposed? Until we really look at infill within our community on some of the undeveloped lots, many of which have issues, and that's why they haven't been developed. Until we look at those, why are we talking about putting them out there? One of the things that people forget when they look at a map is this is a headlands. The wind out there can be tremendous, and you're going to put a hotel right out there that's going to be with maybe balconies overlooking the ocean. That sounds lovely, but who's going to go out there except on the days when there's no wind, which we're actually getting more of those because I think of the changes in the climate. But nonetheless, it's a headlands. It is buffeted by winds. And the way the town has been built, those winds actually funnel up the streets, which, some of the discussion is maintaining the view shed by continuing those open corridors out into the headlands, and then you're making an even longer funnel for those winds to come blowing up into town. So I really appreciate what you're saying about thinking about the impact on the entire town and how it is that we look at things out there, because when you're looking at a flat map, you don't really understand what's going on. Gregory Bateson always used to say the map is not the territory. And and that's actually, Ignacio touched on that last night. You've got to go out there and sit with it and visualize it and think about it. But if you're only looking at a flat map, you're really not understanding what the impact might be. Okay, we've heard, I'll put the hospital out there. Okay, I can see my 92-year-old mother in her walker trying to go against the wind into an entry at the hospital. Maybe it could be built in a way where that wouldn't be the case, and it's beautiful, yes.
It's like if you only go out on a certain calm day.
Right. So I was just out in Arcata at a conference, we went out on the marsh, which used to be an old mill site, which the town reclaimed in some amazing ways, but it has its own issues, especially with sea level rise. And the wind was terrific. You know, the interpreter who took us out there had said, usually there's so many birds out here. Well, the birds weren't there because the wind was, and the kayak trip that had been planned for the other part of the group had to be canceled because the wind was so intense. And this is on Humboldt and Arcata Bay. It's not even out on the ocean. It's somewhat protected. So remembering that it's a headlands, and unless you factor that in, a lot of these really great ideas might not be so great.
Bragg has big infrastructure challenges, not only today but in the future. It's built on a wastewater system that's over 100 years old. Much of it is Orangeburg pipe that's 4 to 5 inches in diameter, and it has a tendency to clog up when high water events happen. You see that all over Fort Bragg. The stormwater drains are not compatible with the amount of rain that we're now beginning to receive, because climate disruption is starting to kick in, and those tend to close down over time with corrosion or whatever. I know for a fact my sister has a place in town, and she's had multiple excavations in her backyard to try to clean the pipes. The whole city is run on this idea that we'll just ignore that and build some new, and it'll be fine. I'm not sure that's how it's going to work. The water situation, the domestic water sources are at best only adequate for the amount of population that we have. Additional income from, water sources, wherever those may be, are going to be necessary if we're going to build out light industry and residential and tourist attractions on the headlands. I'm not sure how that's all going to work. My thought is that they're just going to plan for it and build it and then have to deal with it as it comes up. But one of the things that if you could look at the little map on the back here, this is a real important visual of what life was like here on the headlands 150 years ago. Lots of trees, lots of alder and willow around the creeks. Those were destroyed over time. Native Americans had a way of burning all of that so that there was grasses and new foliage in the spring. When they left in the fall, they would burn all the headlands, and then it would come back up lush so that there would be plenty of wildlife and things for them to harvest when they got back over here in the spring. But you can see lots of green. I think that's one of the visions that the consortium has in the bigger term. Don't worry about this as a potential for development. Not only are there tons of problems to deal with in terms of wastewater and stormwater treatment, and I mean, we already have a big wastewater treatment plant out there that is being revisited as a need to make the pipe go longer or further out into the ocean, and they've got a big grant to redo that whole thing. But where's the water coming from to house these people and deal with all this 440 unit hotel and all this other thing? Why don't we just think about it in terms of a wildlife corridor and make it what it was? Make those corridors wide enough so that we have plants and animals that can survive and thrive there as an attraction for visitors who want to see a more natural landscape. I don't know, it seems to me like we're just not really thinking, the city is not thinking clearly about what the infrastructure needs for water, sewer, and power are as they develop this concept of building this out. But we have a vision of the wildlife corridor and a limited residential and light industry that could enhance this property rather than turn it into more of an infrastructure nightmare for the city to deal with here down the line.
Here. I really like it, George, when you use the word regeneration all the time, like last night. This could be a regeneration nation, and every nation could be a regeneration nation. We live between two forests, one extremely visible of tan oak and Doug fir and redwoods, and the other pretty invisible salt forest out there. And the millside, walking on it today, reminded me again of, we just, we, Homo sapiens, stripped that bare after the Indians, after we got rid of the Indians. We just wasted it. And it's wasted out there right now in a big way. And like you were saying, to have a vision of another, an extension of an amusement park out on the headlands just does not make sense in 2019 and going forward. Things have changed so much in the past few years in the world, and we've become so much wiser and smarter and seeing what our predicament is in the natural world, that I think we could start over on thinking about the mill site, just about, taking what you've learned and what everybody's learned, and say, well, wait a second. We might have this all backwards. In this city council, is there any, how many members of this city council were there 5 years ago? Any? In Fort Bragg? I mean, do we have one remaining member? And they will also term out. But, whatever comes out of this meeting and similar ones, let's reimagine this place. And have people come up here who, the whole world is like, they got it. But I don't know if Fort Bragg's got it. And a lot of us do in Fort Bragg, but as a city, we're pretty behind the times, I would say,
I've got a shred of an old t-shirt from Georgia Pacific with their logo on it on my barn wall. And it just has the words, and there's a tree that's halfway cut and it's falling. It just says across it, doing it.
Right.
So now we have to undo it. Wow. There's not much of the t-shirt left. A word alive. Do it.
One more thing, George, when you said our toxins, or our toxic, that's Georgia Pacific's.
Yep.
That belongs, that corporation owns that. I don't buy that. We have to hold their feet to the fire, continue to do that, and, divert, delay, deny. That's how corporations work. They will string you out until you are dead and buried. And they could have been fined for 15 years at $9 million a year already for delaying and denying and obfuscating and, in my opinion, not pushing forward with remediating the mill site. What is this? Who's been on deck? We kind of have been, but, Araceli, sorry, again. I would ask your community to vote. That would be the thing I'd ask them for. I'd ask them for a candidate to run for city council next time, so we can elect some people who are living in town who have a new vision for the town, perhaps, and need jobs and, representation and things like that. I think that's wide open. From my point of view, talking to the people who are really involved in climate change around the world, it is wide open now for change in the world. And we could, Mendocino is so loved, I felt so lucky to land here. I'm still a newcomer, 35 years, I'm a newcomer here, I really feel like it. But I see, what we have here is just unbelievable. Everybody knows it at this table, it's unbelievable what we're living in here. We live in paradise. And it's, why go further along the line of destroying it? Is your mother Kate?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I know her really well. Just a second, hold on a second. I don't know if I'm done yet.
You can have another shirt, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
Should I tell her you said hi, or?
I'll tell her I saw you.
Okay. Well, it's because of her that I get to be here right now, so.
Of course.
Yeah, she's, in more ways than one, she's also watching my kids at the moment, so. That's great. Yeah,
Introduce yourself, John.
Oh, yes. So I'm John Gallo, and I moved to the coast in '79 when my dad, John Gallo, moved here as well as a doctor. And I got the fortune of going off to college and getting started going to conservation science and being able to move back here 5 years ago. And as soon as I moved back, I engaged with the mill site because I feel like this is central to our whole coast. You know, like how this gets decided is central to the whole rest of our coast. And so huge thanks to George for mentoring me and helping me get up to speed, and for everybody at the consortium as a team working together. You know, there's several members of the consortium here. And I just wanted to make several points, but one, just as a segue from what Bruce was saying, I think more and more people are realizing and recognizing the world that we live in rather than the world that they lived in or that we lived in the 80s or the 90s when GP was kind of booming. And for every month that goes by, more and more people are looking around and waking up like, wow, you know, they go on that first walk on the coastal trail and they look back at town, they look at the ocean. It's like this aha moment. But I think also time is really, really short. So many people are so fed up with the process and they're so ingrained in feeling like as soon as we can start breaking ground out there and building, it's going to save all of our problems. And it's like the fact that we're not developing out there as the scapegoat for all of Fort Bragg's ills. And so I feel like the consortium has really been looking really carefully at this balance. And I want to say several things here, which is I feel like it's really important at the end of the day here. I'm going to have to miss the dinner, unfortunately, but at the end of the day that we come out of this meeting with some good forward steps and some good action items, as well as a lot of good food for thought. And I will put some on the table for discussion, as well as for now or for later. But one of the things that we've done is we've actually applied to the Community Foundation of Mendocino County for $10,000 to try and engage the community in the mill site process by providing science and information in an easily accessible manner and then having dialogue about it. And they really liked the application, but there were so many, and they decided rather than deny us because there were so many, they would give us half of it. So they gave us $5,000. So we're really excited about that. But then now we're looking around saying, well, what do? Do we provide the science as much as we wanted, or do we try and do the community dialogue without the science, or do each one half-hearted? And so we're kind of at a quandary. Each meeting we have, we're like, well, let's figure out the action plan next meeting. Let's just deal with responses and reactions. So most of that money is still on the table, and if we were able to raise another $5,000 for that, that would just take this to the next level. And so that's a unabashed funding pitch as part of an action item. We've got it all set up on our website that you can just even donate $1. And so that is one way of helping move this forward. You know, for larger donations, probably best to talk to George, figure out the way to minimize the overhead. But you know, for smaller donations, just put it through that system, and it's all online. It's all easy. You'll get an automated response, 501c3, you know, tax-deductible donation. But more importantly, everybody here is so engaged in the community and so engaged in the process. That's the real power of this room right now, is being able to say, okay, can we keep this momentum moving forward afterwards? And you know, at the consortium, we've talked in the past about having things like consortium supporters, as well as even an email list. And so both of those could come out of this. Consortium supporters are people that support the mission and what we're doing. And you know, it could even be organizations that we are in communication with. And then people on the email list are people that just get the periodic email, probably no more than once a month. And so George was able to, or somebody made this great one-pager. This is my first time seeing it. Thank you for whoever.
Susan made it.
Oh, Susan made
I
this.
worked with it.
All right, Susan Kelly on the consortium made this great one-pager of our summary of our 3 central social goals, which leads to our mission, and our 2 guiding principles, and our 8 immediate objectives. And so there's a stack of them by the door. And what I'm going to do is I'll just be so bold as to, before I pass the baton, I'm going to pass this flyer about it, as well as my little notebook with my very official looking email sign-up sheet right here. And so if people want to just put their email on it, we will added onto the MailChimp email list that we're starting to develop for this. And so when emails go out. But now getting back to brass tacks, I've been asked to speak a little bit to the actual activism that's happening. I was the only person at the consortium that was able to sit through the 4-hour meeting on Saturday. There were some people here in the room that were able to be through there the whole time as well, and so I'm grateful for that. And some really amazing things happened. For the first time since October, we've got a little budge on the map, on the zoning map, which up until a month ago, people were saying that's the final map, that's the one that's going to the Coastal Commission. But enough of the community was talking, hey, wait, you know, there's some things that are wrong here. And we've got 2 great new council members that are pushing the envelope forward of just saying, let's be wise here. And so they were able to, between them and the mayor, convince the city to like reassess things. So now we've got the wildlife corridor that we've been asking for is now on the books. Instead of the hotel that's planned to go all the way out to Otsuchi Point, we've got another 150-foot barrier, buffer between that and the coastal trail fence. So it might not seem like much, but 150 feet times that whole half mile is a really significant amount of land. And so kudos to the city council for voting that in 5-0. Despite some pushback from the skunk train there. But I think the issue at the table right now, if people are wondering what the activism issues are, it's this issue of industrial. It's how much industrial is going to be out there, if any at all, and where is it going to be? And so these issues about, well, where else on the Fort Bragg coast can the industrial go is really key. So thank you talking about scale and looking outside of the box. And also, wait, slow down a little bit. What are our assumptions? Our assumptions are, by so many people pushing for industrial, that there's this group of people in Fort Bragg that worked at the mill for many generations. They don't know what else to do. They've been crying for more industrial work. They've been on unemployment as much as possible, telling their elected officials, get some more industrial in town. We need it, right? And is that really going to save our town? And is it going to save these people? And is there a way that these people that really, really want industrial, is there a way that they can find their heart's content without having to put industrial out there on the mill site? Those are some of the issues that I feel like are kind of at the heart of the activism at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton unless there's any particular quick questions of clarification on that. But thank you guys for giving me the floor and the opportunity.
I have a quick question.
Quick question of clarification. Yeah.
Is there a way to bring science to the importance of the coastline interface and wetlands? Like the importance of wetlands to not be developed and how important wetlands are, because that is a wetland.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's creeks.
Right.
So, I mean, that science being brought.
That's one of the many, many issues that can come to the table if we're able to bring science to the table effectively here in the next few months. We've been invited by the mayor to give a 1-hour or to give an evening presentation at Town Hall, open to the public, which is fantastic. We've taken them up on it. We haven't set the date, but we can figure out what goes on the agenda, what science we present. We're going to present this online mapping project we've been building for the last couple of years. We've been busy. We had 2 really great anonymous donations last year, and then we've been doing a ton of volunteer work. So we have an online mapping project that we can roll out at this meeting as part of the science, which shows some of the wetlands. So
As it pertains to the health of the community.
That's right.
To try to dissuade this industry.
That's right. So Fort Bragg Headlands Consortium is the name, and our URL is that name, all one word, .org. We just finished our website. Thanks.
And it's on that
It's not
flyer.
done.
Oh, yes. Well,
It's
the
still
web-
being developed.
The website does have a picture of a butterfly on it.
Websites are never done.
No.
Maggie just said that, and I agree.
Yep. And, and the idea about a consortium too is it's a group of organizations and individuals that don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything, but we all see eye to eye on the bigger mission. And that's going to be our power and strength. Some people on this around this table have more of an activist bent than me, some have less than an activist bent, But the overall vision for the mill site is really what kind of keeps us united, and our diversity as well, you know, like Hal and Jim pulling together this symposium as like part of the Mendocino Institute, you know, things like that are just really, really heartening. And so I think that the future is bright if we keep plugging at it and keep working together.
I just want to clarify that the wetlands out there are mandated open space by the state of California. There cannot be any development there. However, there have been maps, zoning maps proposed that basically build right up to the buffer zones around the mandated wetlands. And when you do that, if you build in an area that's called the donut hole that's surrounded by wetlands, then you have to put infrastructure across those wetlands, which means creating culverts, bringing pipes and electricity and services and roads and so on, and it completely disrupts those natural habitats. So it's definitely part of what Fort Bragg Headlands Consortium is trying to bring to bear, are how wetlands function and what's not going to work. And that's not going to work if you are going to have any kind of functioning ecosystem out there.
Well, haven't much of the wetlands been like paved over and completely adulterated by
Yeah,
human
these are just the current existing wetlands
Right.
that can be seen and mapped as ecologically sensitive habitats. They're
Well, but
called
I'm speaking from the restoration point of view.
Right, so part of the restoration, which we've been talking about and Mitch has been talking about, which is the daylighting of the creeks, actually means creating some new wetland
Right.
areas.
Right.
You know, so, but right now, all that's on the map are the ones that are currently there that are mandated as ESHAs, environmentally sensitive habitat areas, and there cannot be any development there. However, there are areas all around it, and definitely some of the proposed maps build right up to those, which means you have to have infrastructure crossing them, and that interferes with their functioning and also with just the beauty of them and the enjoyment of them and so on. And so even the areas that are covered in asphalt, if industry goes out there, they're gonna have to dig it up anyway. So to say only industry can go out where there's concrete and asphalt is a false need. It's absolutely the case that it can be restored. And George dug up some and sent to us some wonderful restoration efforts that are being done in industrial areas. Some of which include a plug-and-plant model where you just take and you punch holes into concrete and asphalt, and you have the community come out or school groups come out and plant native plants in those areas, and those plants and those roots will break up that concrete and that asphalt, even areas where it's 5 feet deep, which is what Marie says about every, you know, it's all 5 feet deep out there. It doesn't matter, roots are non-discriminatory. They'll go through anything. I mean, the nature will reclaim if we decide that's what we want to have done, and we can make it a community project. The thing that we have to know though is that it's clean enough for us to go out there and punch those holes and to have kids coming out. If it's not clean underneath those asphalt and concrete pads, then that's a problem. And we don't know because they didn't test underneath the pads. So that's all part of that, you know, bringing the science to bear.
So I just want to have a comment about creeks and daylighting creeks, because this is sort of the field that I work in, and one of the things that we have to realize is that, and I am a proponent of daylighting creeks. However, creeks do not stay in one place. They move, and especially when they get to be like low gradient creeks, because as you start to build anywhere, it doesn't even matter whether it's, you know, 2 miles upstream, that you're going to have, if you have more impervious surfaces and you have more runoff and you have more, because of climate variations, you have more storm events, you're going to have more runoff. More runoff means that when it gets to that low gradient point, it's going to spread out, they're going to expand. Your vegetation, your what you call your riparian or your wetland vegetation is going to expand. And I'm not saying that that's a reason not to daylight the creeks, but it's to realize that any planning process that includes a regenerative restoration component has to really say that that footprint of buildable space is going to be, yeah, it's going to be compromised. It's going to be a lot of give and take. And I, perfect, you know, if it were me and I were going to live right on the coast, I would want to have green space around me. So it's just like, we can look at a map, and we can look at a map of where the creeks were. But that's where the creeks were when that cartographer was making that map. And most of our areas, most of our landscapes, all over California, you know, those rivers are Pleistocene rivers for the most part, and they were all over. They were from one side of the valley to the other. And then when landowners come to me and say, oh my gosh, the creek or the river is taking away my land, so we have to put, you know, riprap, or we have to, you know, do something. And I just look at them and say, you know, I feel your pain, but that land doesn't really belong to you. It belongs to the creek. So we have to be prepared for that eventuality as well. Yeah.
Several points, quickly, going back to Araceli, rather than us asking her what she can do, which it wasn't exactly what happened, but I think that we should think about, well, have we been attending the fiestas and supporting those? Have we been attending the big talent show, you know, and supporting that? When there have been issues of deep concern in the schools, have we been there to support the moms and the kids who are asking for fair treatment? When we see programs being cut back in the schools, are we there to say that it's unfair to this generation of kids to not have access to things like art and music and tutoring and so forth? That's one thing that I would say we might do, and I'm hoping things too are changing, but I have to say that over the past years, one never sees our elected leaders at these occasions, which one would think that they would be duty-bound to be participating in these important occasions for this large and important part of our community. Secondly, though, I wanted to say that there's a lot of mythology really about work and pay and so forth that's being discussed. And when I hear about light industry, I always ask, what do you mean by light industry? What is light industry? What are you talking about? And I think we need to be clear about that when people just say, as if it's a given, that's the solution to everything. And it's also sadly true that industrial jobs are no longer the high-paying jobs of our imagination, or maybe that they were at one time. If you go to work for Volkswagen in Chattanooga, Tennessee, you start out at $13 an hour. That's less than you would make in Richmond at any job. We should remember that. The people who are talking about jobs, and what are we going to get if we get a 400-room hotel? What kind of jobs are those going to be? Are they going to take this? Their management going to be recruited from here, from us, or who's going to do the cleaning and the repairing and the gardening and so forth? And what are they going to be paid? So I think we have to be firm on those kinds of things. I can imagine jobs in restoration, jobs in recreation, which people could be trained for and become skilled in, working in the woods and working on the coast and working in the headlines, which could be good jobs. They could be trained for them, and we could insist that they be well-paid jobs. And I would go about, that issue of jobs in that sense, and that if children want to stay here because they like the out of doors, let's create good outdoors jobs for them to. And there's no reason why in this horribly crowded world now that we shouldn't have recreation for people to come here. That we've also got Jackson State Forest, which belongs to the state. And imagine if that could be opened up for people and for recreation and the town as well. What a draw that would be, rather than as someone said to me, for so many people coming to Fort Bragg means to kind of wander around aimlessly looking into the trinkets shops and the boutiques where there's stuff that they can't afford. And it often isn't a place that there's really something for people to do. So those would be, I guess, my comments. I think like lots of us, I'd like to see a place to ride your bike, a place to go for a walk or a jog, a place to have a picnic, a place to maybe play ball. You know, and there's space for that. That's what I would like to see. I'd also like, in case we haven't done this yet, to thank Michelle for coming and sitting through all of this patiently. And I hope you've found it interesting. And if you have something to say to us, I hope you will be sure to do that in the test. I'd like to thank you very much for coming, and I know you've had a busy day.
By the way, I was recreation manager for the state forest.
And I know you've had a busy day, so thank you very much for coming. And
Redwood Trail, the great Redwood Trail is now inaugurated.
Wow. Where is that?
The rail to trail.
Up here.
Oh, it's official, huh? Okay.
Pardon?
Where is it?
Millions of dollars.
Great.
So do we have like some last questions for our panelists? I know that you were supposed to go until 4. Do you guys want to go to 4:30? Is that okay with everyone?
That was what we were going till
Are we going
4:30.
4:30? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
I'd love to throw out a couple of Noyo Center comments, kind of speaking to some of what was your Cal was bringing up also. And I think it's maybe a slightly different perspective on some of the folks who are coming up and visiting this community. And, you know, somebody is spending money and keeping all these galleries and shops open. And I think that there's a way that if we can figure out how to tell this story to those people who find so much meaning and inspiration in coming and visiting this place, I think that could give us a lot of leverage, because I know that, you know, it sounds like with the consortium, and I know at the Noyo Center, there's always this funding question of like, where's the money going to come from for this? And if we don't want it to be light industry, and if we do want to have good paying jobs, like where are those financial resources coming from? And I forget the exact numbers, but I've heard that there's like thousands of people walking along the coastal trail every day. And I know our downtown discovery center for the Noyo Center is starting to see hundreds of people every day. And so those are places where there's a lot of visibility for this story, potential for visibility. And so I guess I want to both encourage people to continue promoting those spaces, and when friends and family come and visit, you know, bring them to the Noyo Center. It's really cool, face-to-face with the largest orca skeleton in the world. And also maybe an invitation or a call out as, you know, how cool it would be to have an informational board about what's going on with the mill site and these development questions. We just had a fellow recently stop in who's an engineer and is willing to volunteer some time to help us with the development of our center out there. And I think there are a lot of, there's just potential like positive relationships that can come out of having that story a little more accessible to our visitors, who really also care about the future of the coast and the future of this gem of wilderness and everything. So yeah, I think that's all. Cool.
I think I'd be derelict in my duty if I didn't speak up for the local fire departments. I think the only elected official in the room. I'm the president of the Mendocino Fire Protection District. Tess is elected, I'm sorry.
How about the fishing game? Thanks,
You were elected to the fishing game commission.
I had to be
The only
appointed.
one on a local fire district. We meet here, thanks to the League of Women Voters, once a year as elected officials to meet the public. And one of the big public concerns that I'm hearing from our constituency is how to protect the local residents from the influx of people who come here who need medical attention at one reason, for one reason or another, either in the ocean or, support, ambulance support or whatever. We're talking about trying to entice people to come here to eat the scenery, as my friend James Bernard once said from the Land Trust. That's the reason people come here. They're here for a reason, to see what we have and to reminisce about how things are in their own communities, I guess, and compare and contrast what life is like. And then, like many of you have said, we're here because this is a beautiful place. Indeed it is. But from an emergency standpoint, a lot of what we generate as tax income for the county does not return back here to this community. And there are a number of us who are working with the supervisors to try to get some of that 11% bed tax to come back to our communities for community support here, for infrastructure, for community support, and it's very difficult. I think we're making some headway now that Ted Williams, who was a fire chief in Albion, is on the board. But it's very important that we all have this vision that, as Bruce and I think Patty were saying, we've got to look at this in a bigger context. I think John said it too. One of the beauties about John's mapping project is you can see the whole coast and overlay different things. One of the things that's difficult to overlay is what the attraction is here and why people come here and what they're going to need once they get here. And so we have to be, cognizant of the fact that there are more things at play here than just saving the headlands or, reconfiguring the idea that the headlands can be sold to the highest bidder. So I would just like to put that into the mix and say, we need to talk to our elected officials and let them know we on the coast are not receiving the proportion of county tax money that's being generated by and large on the coast for the purposes necessary to do the Noyo Center, to do paving of streets, to get the infrastructure of our cities, to get the garbage cleaned up in Mendocino. If you've been through Mendocino on a Friday afternoon with the ravens tearing things up, and we need more garbage pickup, we need to have more services. And that's something that we all have to work on, because we are essentially the vision that you're going to see as it comes around, attracting more people to come here. That's the idea.
I know you're hearing from me a lot, I'm sorry if you take up so much space, but just trying to weave all these things together that people are saying. Ecotourism is a real thing. And what Maggie was saying and what several different people are saying, it seems that rather than people coming here to consume and literally, as you said, eat up the land, eat up the scenery, and spend money on art and trinkets and things like that, although artists are very important, that we appeal to the sort of ecotourism
Participation.
Yeah, that people come here and learn about, oh, this is an amazing place because we're doing these things, because of the Noyo Center, because of the Headlands, consortium, because of these amazing initiatives that we're trying to put forward. And that way, there would be more participation by people that don't even live here that might be willing to provide funding for some of these things, as well as I don't know much about the politics here, but I know that San Francisco has a hotel and restaurant tax. It's a tourism tax. Basically, the industries, especially the vineyards, the industries that really benefit from tourism can be taxed a little bit extra to support these efforts.
That's what he was talking about, but it goes to the county.
Yeah, we have that tax.
We have that, we have the TOT tax,
Okay.
but it goes to the county.
Well, we're part of the county, so somehow it needs to
We are part
trickle.
of the county, of course.
It needs to trickle into this effort.
Yeah, and it goes to,
What's that?
the city tax.
Is there a separate Fort Bragg?
Is there a Fort Bragg?
There isn't a separate Fort Bragg.
So I think that's.
That's what I'm talking about. San
It's a
Francisco
separate
has its
tax.
own
Yeah, there is.
separate city,
Yes.
restaurant, and
Okay.
hotel tax.
Okay.
So these are things that we could bring when talking to the board
Well, that's
supervisors,
why
and
they
talking
want
to
a
the city
400
council.
hotel.
What's that?
That's That's why they want a 400-room hotel possibly.
Well, that's not ecotourism.
No, it's not.
People, we need
You're
to
right.
be building infrastructure, if there's going to be any infrastructure out there that's accommodating tourism, to be ecologically oriented and green, and something that's going to be supporting that system rather than another massive imposition.
And safe. More people means more egress and exits in and off a very tight corridor up and down. And as we all know, it's getting more and more difficult to pull out and go left and right on Highway 1. There are big issues around fire, Simpson Lane, Gordon Lane, all these places that are dead, Albion Ridge. There are these dead-end, one-way in and out. Look what happened in Paradise. I mean, we have issues here that we have to look at in the bigger, broader view as we invite more people to come.
Well, but the thing is that George was also talking about scaling down. Maybe we don't need so many people coming here. Maybe the amount of people that are coming here
Don't
is
get me
just
wrong.
fine.
The people are going to come here.
They're
The
gonna
people
come
are
here,
going to come.
but there's a lot of people that don't come here just because of the roads. They don't want to go up 20, they don't want to go up 128. It's just too tedious for them. So keeping things scalable, I think, is just so important for this area to remain, especially what you were bringing up this morning, as like a retreat, like a place where people who are on the front lines of this battle can come to just decompress and regenerate and restore. I just think that that's really important.
So I have a question, I'm not exactly sure who can answer it, but maybe Tess or John or somebody can. And I appreciate everybody's sharing kind of the visions for what they think should happen next. But one of the things that I'm concerned about is the vulnerability of Fort Bragg to big box and big corporations because of deferred maintenance and needs. I know our hospital's been in trouble, our schools probably have deferred maintenance, our roads. I mean, Fort Bragg's done some great jobs of doing some impervious, stormwater pollution prevention. And I know that we've had projects on the table that haven't been built yet, but that are very LID and green certified. And I'd love to see more of that, but I'm just sort of wondering, I know that when, for an example, Costco came to Ukiah, in order to get their permits, their building permits and their permission to expand behind the airport and that area that's sort of south and east of the downtown, they had to come up with a lot of money to pay the city of Fort Bragg, and they did massive road improvements in infrastructure. And you can guess what I meant, So I'm just wondering, we have to be aware that Fort Bragg maybe has some needs that makes the mill site look very attractive in terms of what investors might be able to contribute to offset some of those deferred needs and some of those future expenditures. So, I mean, that is what we're also having to deal with here. So, does anybody have anything that they want to say about that? Because I don't know how you address that.
I have a lot to say about that.
Okay.
I'm actually in the process of writing a letter to the Planning Commission and the City Council about having, if not a moratorium on big box stores, franchise stores, formula stores, to at least have a policy of really looking carefully at what the impact is. What is it? What kinds of jobs do they provide? Are they providing a service that's already provided in town? Are they going to displace existing businesses or prevent local businesses from starting something similar if they're providing something that's not currently provided?
Leslie, I think the previous city council passed a provision that precluded at the time big box stores. But subsequently, Walmart and a lot of the big box stores are having smaller versions of themselves, which are really kind of just the front end of this, this huge machine.
Well,
so that it's a smaller. So that's what's
formula and
jeopardy
franchise stores as well. Because the thing is, when you have a large corporation behind a company like that, or a franchise store, often the jobs that are brought aren't well paying. And in addition, a lot of the revenue that that's generated draws from existing businesses, and that money leaves the community. So are there ways in which those stores give back to the community? How do they give back? So I think that it's very, and when you have those deep corporate pockets, they can afford to do things like buy property and develop it without turning a profit for a while, because they've got that money behind them. It's much harder for local businesses to do that because they've got to hit the ground running in order to not go under.
Taco Bell was able to do every single thing that the city of Fort Bragg, and the city of Fort Bragg is pretty, there's a long list of things that they want done, you know, native plants, you know.
Mountain bikes.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that you're exactly right. Taco Bell was able to immediately answer everything positively, check off all the boxes, pay the money, and now we see this endless line of vehicles going through Taco Bell.
But the other thing you have to ask is, what's the impact on the character of the community?
Of course.
If you drive through Willits and see all those stores, and then you have to drive an hour to get to Fort Bragg, and you see those same stores. It's like, what's the loss in terms of community character? And how is it that we can support local businesses to open unique and interesting businesses that thrive and that support the community and themselves, so that we're unique? Otherwise, we're just anywhere USA. And we already have enough of those stores. It's like, Mountain Mike's, really? Don't we have enough pizza in this town already? I'm assuming that Mountain Mike's is affecting Round Table more than anybody else, and so that's another franchise store. But I don't know. I was a bit gobsmacked.
Jess was going to say something.
I'll address that. I have to be really careful, because if I show any prejudice one way or another, then I have to recluse myself to any vote. So what I wanted to say, though, all along is that the land is for sale and it's cheap. If you want to control who's in there, buy it. That's what I've been saying on City Council every single time we talk about the Georgia Pacific. Which parts of this land can we buy to preserve what we want in it? We can zone until we're blue in the death. We can argue over what kind of industry, blah, blah, blah. But if we cannot control who the Koch brothers sell it to. We can't. So we need to buy it. So you need to get a land trust. You need to do fundraising, like you bought Big River or any of those other land trust issues, and purchase it and maybe resell it to the place that you want or the vision that you have. So to control the big box stores, you gotta buy it. Or you gotta get them to donate. That's the way it has to be, I think.
Many cities, including San Francisco, all over Europe, have placed moratoriums on formula businesses and have not allowed them in the city within their jurisdiction, and it's something that I really truly wish Fort Bragg would do. It's so horrible, the southern corridor driving into town, and you have McDonald's, and it's just horrid.
Right, we have a unique area here.
Yeah, and I think that we really lose the character and the nature of people. They're going to go to McDonald's because they know what they're going to get. So it really sucks the dollars out of our local economy. It's something I'm really concerned about too, and I think everybody should be. John?
Yeah, well, I think that a much more, I do feel like buying the land would actually solve so many problems, as opposed to like angling to try and, angling for this policy change is important. It's important to keep the heat on, but it's a big long shot. But this land is super cheap right now. If the rumors are true about the selling prices of these two properties that have been sold, it's jaw-dropping.
What are the rumors?
What are they?
I don't spread rumors like that. They're just cheap, and part of it.
He's got an offer.
I was looking at my wallet to see if I could pull it.
Everyone
a little
put
short.
$1.
But seriously, I do think that is really worthy of discussion. If I was going to be here at the dinner tonight, I would definitely mention that to whoever I was talking to.
Maybe we should be inviting Tom Potter here, you know, and not.
I'm not sure Tom Honer is the right person to invite, but I do feel like people that know about community land trusts and that have been discussing them would be a great follow-up meeting would be a meeting about a community land trust. Who knows what they're about, who's been talking about them, I've seen it in the local paper with regards to some of the housing issues. I don't see why it couldn't be a community land trust that is addressing the housing issues and the headwinds at the same time. Maybe it's two, but it just seems to make sense to be one. And then who's going to go ahead and contact GP and find out what's the asking price? You know, we've got there's two really big, there's one really small parcel that's over there by Mendo Mill and includes the rest of the forest, which would be a really important one to conserve. And then there's a really big one, which is pretty much the whole rest of the south parcel. What's the asking price for both of those, and where can we go from there? Who's going to make that ask? And so I would volunteer my time to show up at that meeting as well.
George? Yeah, just real quickly, these things often happen in phases or steps. And one thing I want to point out is, and Tess spoke about this at the last city council meeting, there are carbon offset monies for things like restoration or creating wetland making wetland areas more healthy. So there's carbon offsets. I just read a letter, I just got it from Chantel O'Neill, who is our city's technology, engineer really for the wastewater, for the stormwater treatment programs. And she sent me a letter from Caltrans, which, I was pretty gobsmacked when she told me about this, and I read the letter. They're really looking at the creek daylighting as something that Caltrans would pay for, because they have a huge stack of mitigation issues, and they have lots of money. So that's two sources right there. But there are other sources also, if we think forward, for the vision part of this. But the tricky thing is, like the Mendocino Land Trust cannot buy a piece of property that has cleanup issues. It's just not part of their vision. Maybe a community land trust, I'm not sure about that. But so there might be a transition thing that we're thinking about here, or another entity that could help us out. There is also a lot of funding for coastal communities in climate change mitigation and coastal communities sea level rise adaptation strategies, all of which are spoken to by this issue of making that dangerous area out there safe by cleaning it properly, and then restoring the wetlands and what will become an estuarine, you've got the experts here, environment when the seas rise and move in the way this little cartoon shows us here, what's going to be happening there.
Yes, Cap.
Why don't we stick to, well, David wants to say something, why don't we stick to our agenda and call it a day? Is that all right with people?
I think we ought to so I was just talking, so maybe this is unfair, but I think if somebody really urgently wants to speak up right now, we've been I wanted to bring some kind of like positive side to this, where's the money going to come from part of it, but David wanted to say something.
Well, I was going to say just quickly that there have been a number of meetings over the past 15 years of people here in the coastal community knowledgeable about and interested in land trusts for various purposes. And they always founder on the major issue of where are you going to get the money. And the most logical entity to take a lead role in the mill site property is the city of Fort Bragg. The city of Fort Bragg is too scared of tackling that product. And it's been politically a non-starter for 15 years of discussion about it. They should be taking the lead and coming to the table with Georgia Pacific as a financial partner and negotiating the cleanup the way the city wants it, to get the uses out of it that the city wants. Because, I'll just say it point blank, and we can talk about it at Judy's, what the people in the boat out there fishing said, nothing's ever gonna happen here, is absolutely right unless you motivate Georgia Pacific to get off the ball. They're happy to mothball this piece of property forever. They don't even know it's on the books outside of the project manager. I mean, David and what's his name, Koch, don't even know they own this piece of property, I guarantee it. It gets lost in the rounding for them. So what's going to motivate GP to do something? Somebody has to come to the table and make it happen. And, you know, with all the respect I have for DTSC, DTSC, the state does not have the power to do what you want them to do. You know, if across the street from Highway 1 was the Unified School District of Fort Bragg sitting on a Superfund site, because they inherited, they bought it accidentally down years ago, and it used to be a gas station, it used to be a plating operation. And also the Unified School District owns that. Well, DTSC has to be able to tell the world, we're gonna give the school district the same requirements that we're gonna give GP. And Joe Smith up the road, and the city of Richmond, when it's dealing with a hazardous waste site, we're gonna give everybody the same fair deal. And the only way we've historically been able to develop standards that are fair is based on use. So they say, how is this property going to be used? We will clean it up to health standards based on that use. Otherwise, they get sued and they're held to be arbitrary and capricious, taking a property. It has to be some sort of point of reference the state has. And the DTSC in this project has never had a fixed point of reference that they can use to enforce. There's no use plan here because Koch owns it. The city is sort of biddling around with zoning in all these decades, and they never get to any kind of point where DTSC can say, oh, if that's what you want to do, here's what the cleanup standard that we are going to enforce is going to be. Here's the order. DTSC can do that, but only at that point. And I think the problem in this whole project is that the city of Fort Bragg, if we had energy to put into this, put it into the politics of this city and get the city off the dime to take control of its future and acquire the site. Come in as a partner with GP. Forget the evil court versus the injuria of the city. What do you want to happen? Do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? I think we all want to be happy down the road, and that means taking control over our future. And that means entering into it from a political standpoint and not sitting on the sideline saying, hey, state, come and save us. Which is my impression of what the city has been doing all these years. So that's my summary.
One of the issues is that most of the remaining toxins are in what's called OUE, which are in the mandated wetlands, which the city really has no control over. So I understand what you're saying, and somebody buys the property, and those wetlands, we've been told the Coastal Commission has more to say about what happens there than the city because that can't be zoned for any kind of development because they're mandated wetlands, they're ESHAs. So I think what you're saying is really valid. I think we have to understand that aspect of it because that's where most of the toxins remain. And I don't know how that impacts what ETSC can tell the GP because it's not property that can be sold to be developed.
That's right, but whoever owns the property around it would have pressure that they can bring to bear on what happens in those
That's
wetlands.
what I was wondering.
And right now, the city does not have a strong voice in this conversation at all. The city has almost no voice in this conversation. And when the city says, we want it cleaned up, and we'll pass a resolution that we want the highest cleanup standards, it's really a meaningless gesture because it has no active voice in what really happens down the line.
So should we wrap it up? Does everybody want to?
Anybody want to say anything?
Councilors,